Hello and welcome back to Bourbon Barrel Talk. I'm your host, Scott Minton, and we are having a great time with our friends from ZAK Cooperage. How are you doing today, Zach?
Pretty good.
Good.
I appreciate you having us on.
We're so glad that you are on here today.
We're going
to learn all about
this podcast
barrels
is
today.
Now complete because Jessica's taking a selfie in the middle of.
Absolutely.
I really look forward to that.
Well, that's kind of the good thing about this. We're gonna cover new barrels completely with Zach, and we're gonna find out what goes into making a barrel, what it takes to make a barrel, like what type of different barrels there are. We're gonna cover all that, and then Jess, you're in the barrel industry too, aren't you?
I am. I am in the used barrel industry.
Used barrels.
Used barrels.
That's what H&A. Is that who you work for?
I do H&A barrel management.
There you go. Cool. So, well, anyway, we're gonna cover barrels, because that's something that people have been asking about. They're like, well, hey, give us more details on that, and we're going to kind of
We have had a lot of inquiries about it because throughout the course of our podcast, we go through, right, people share different barrel picks with us. We go through different regions, and everyone's like, what really makes some of these picks so different than others? And everyone preaches the barrel that it comes from. So I feel like a little education on that would be great.
Yeah.
100%.
And that's where Zach comes into play. 'Cause I know nothing about this.
I know enough to be dangerous, so I'm excited.
You don't know anything to be dangerous.
Yeah, sure I do.
Okay.
But I'm going to start off with my favorite question, and this is one that, I've always feel like is, where do you get the best wood from? Like, there's always been rumors.
No,
like
personal question, buddy.
Well, no, absolutely. But like I've heard rumors that like Missouri has the best oak or North Carolina has the best oak, things like that. So like you're in the business. Like if you're making barrels, where do you
he's
like
in
to
the
get,
business?
No, he's not. Where do you get the best wood?
Yeah, so we're located in Athertonville, Kentucky, which that's pretty centrally located, about 10 miles south of Bardstown. And we're sourcing white oak logs from 150-mile radius around our location. So there's a few reasons because, in our opinion, that's where the best white oak comes from. The Kentucky hardwood forests are rich with white oak, and for us, that's where we're trying to source from. Logistically, it's very difficult to be able to pay somebody to haul from very far away. So there's a cost element to it. There's a quality element to it. If you go too far north, there's less white oak in some regions, but you have tighter grain. So there's different elements of your taste profiles that come through. Similar south, you get wider grain and different taste profiles. So different regions offer different taste profiles.
So let's dive in a little bit on that. So when you talk about grain and you talk about wider grain versus thinner grain, things like that. So those are basically the rings of the tree. Is that the way I'm reading into that?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so that has to do with how much moisture is getting into it, drought seasons, not drought, rain, things to that nature. That's what kind of goes into that piece. Is that right?
Yeah, so it's a lot of your how long your seasons last. So for your growth seasons up north, there's less sunlight, there's less of a summer period, so your growth time is shorter. Down in the south, you have longer summers. You have exposure to a longer growth period, so that in turn gives you a wider grain.
Gotcha. So that gives you more of that. So dive back into that piece. So with moisture, right? So like I've heard that whenever you have a drought, it is so moist. So when you have a drought versus a very wet season or things to that nature, how does that affect the rings of the tree, and how does that affect the wood that goes into the barrel in that capacity?
Yeah. So the climate, the access to water, that'll definitely impact the growth ring structure. And, whenever you're looking at a tree that you're cutting down, the rings, it could be a 60, 80-year-old white oak tree. So there's plenty of fluctuation in the climate trends over that time period. So each tree in each region, really varies. So that's kind of what makes each barrel very unique.
Yeah.
It's all built out of different trees. So you can get some unique profiles out of individual single barrels.
Gotcha.
I think that's so cool because then it's almost like it's luck of the draw that some of that stuff blends well with different mashes from different distilleries.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's awesome. I mean, it's really cool to see how all of that plays into effect with, I mean, right? Looking here, there's probably 120 different bottles from different distilleries. And it's insane to see that so many of them have barrels from the same cooperage and they taste totally different.
Yep. And the mash bills aren't that much different, right? Like when you look at certain...
I mean, they're pretty much the same.
Yeah, a lot of them are very similar in capacity. But even if you just take somebody, let's just hypothetically say, let's take Old Forester, for example, right? And I know they do their own barrels, but let's just use them as an example. Like, every barrel just tastes different. When you get a single barrel, when you go into the rick house and you try stuff from them, it's just, that's the way it is. It's just different and things to that nature. So defining marks, like I watched a video one time that Jess did not that long ago on Instagram and talked about
which one of the million videos did you
it was
watch?
Like, well,
It is my job to produce content
absolutely.
for the people.
I'll be honest with you, this was my favorite video you've done in a long time. It had to do with the markings on the barrels, like OR was this and this means this. So how do you guys mark your barrels so that way people know? Like if somebody's walking through a rick house and they'll be like, "Oh, dude, that's a ZAK barrel." Like what does that look like?
Yeah, so we mark on our rivets with Z for the Zimlich family. And then we also put a ZAK stamp onto our barrel as well. So that way it's represented when it's laying on its side in the rick house as well.
That's pretty cool. So that way you can see it if it ends up being a top bung or a side bung, you can see, right?
Exactly.
Which is awesome.
Yeah.
I do like. There's a barrel here. No one can see it because this is voice only.
Right.
But there is a barrel here, and the rivets do all have Z's on it, and I think it's really cool.
I will say I can like walk by barrels now and be like, "Is that your barrel?" Because the ZAK barrels do look different. They look a lot like Brown Foreman's barrels. And Zach
they're built different, huh?
Well, they're yeah, they're just. Zach was like, "I may not have the prettiest barrel, but does it leak? No." But like when it's a new barrel, you can tell because they like mark the bung stave or like there's like little pieces of char here, and I can just like see it and be like, "Oh, the shape of that barrel looks like Zach's," or it's Brown Foreman's. I'm like, I can't really.
Gotcha.
I have to get like very close, but the rivets like wear off. I feel like over time.
That's so odd that I brought up Old Forester then, because they're very similar. That's funny.
Yeah, it was Zach's grandpa that started out at Brown Foreman.
Oh, okay.
For his whole entire life and career, so that's why
That was actually my next question. How did you get started into the barrel business, man? Like,
Yeah, it all started with Bert, my grandfather. So he started back as his first job out of college, working for Brown Foreman Cooperage.
So, sorry to start. How many old dudes do you hear like, oh, they went to college and then they went to go work for Brown Foreman or Philip Morris or
million people,
like a billion people in the Louisville market? Like they all
Right.
went to go work for these companies. Like they got these degrees to do something and they end up working for a Cooperage.
He was an engineer, like a mechanical engineer, and the way that Zach has told me is like he was either going to go to Florida, right?
Yeah.
And then Brown Foreman was like, there are no girls
on a
there. It's a
second.
military base. Like stay here.
That's so funny. So I'm sorry. Go ahead. Continue.
Yeah, so he got started at Brown Foreman, and then throughout the years he worked his way up and eventually got to be VP of engineering over Brown Foreman, and then also president of Jack Daniels.
Oh, wow.
And then
Just casually.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to start as a pogue here, and then, oh, yeah, I run Jack Daniels. No big deal.
Yeah, there's a bottle they gave him. Did we have the bottle, or is it he's at his house? And
Yeah,
Bert's
that's
still
it.
alive. He's 93, 94.
Oh, wow. That's
yeah,
amazing.
He's still with us. He still gets all the emails.
Oh, yeah.
But they made a bottle for him. But Brown Foreman makes you retire.
Yeah, so at age 65, they forced him to retire. He came back a couple times when they were trying to like cleanly transition to other leadership for the next phase for Brown Foreman. And then, so his passion had always been in the cooperage industry and the stave milling industry. So he ended up starting ZAK Cooperage with my father. So after work each day, they would go down there, start trying to get equipment in place, start getting the operation up and running, and eventually we got it going in 1990.
Right.
As a stave mill.
Yeah, so we were originally just producing staves, primarily for like the export markets, like Spain, Portugal, France, for different wine barrels. And then we would hold back the bourbon grade stuff for ourselves until we got enough equipment to actually manufacture the barrels ourselves.
Gotcha.
And then we got it all started.
So then was your stave mill always ZAK Cooperage then?
Technically, it was ZAK Ltd, ZAK Limited.
So where did that name come from? Because if I recall correctly, It's a little older than you are.
Yeah, Zach was named after the Cooperage.
Yes.
It's spelled differently.
Yes. Common question. So our last name is Zimlich.
Yeah.
And we are located in the old Athertonville distillery. It was most recently one of the 4 Seagram's plants. So being located in Athertonville, Kentucky, we figured we would take the Zimlich family and Athertonville, Kentucky, mash it together. So Zimlich's Athertonville, Kentucky Cooperage.
Huh. That's pretty cool.
I will say the
First
word.
time I've ever heard that.
It is funny. That's when I first met Zach. I'm like, your name's Zach, but how old's the Cooperage? Like, what? A lot of people don't know what the word Cooperage is. I have learned this as I've been, like, people, like, even in the industry. So a Cooperage is a place where barrels are made. I was talking to a girl who, her daughter's, like, dating someone who works at the Cooperage where they're at. And she's like, oh, you mean the sawmill? Because it's like a stave mill. It's like they're cutting wood. And so they refer to it as, like, a sawmill. And she's like, I had no idea what a cooperage is, but the cooperage part is like where the barrels are raised and stuff. So yeah, cooperage is like not a word that like we know in bourbon, but not a word that people like get intuitively.
So let's get into
Learned 2 things there.
what makes a barrel cost what it costs, and then what makes a barrel unique. You know, like obviously you've got the different cuts, right? The different styles of wood. Char levels is probably a big thing that some people are, and toasting and all the stuff that's, you know, hot to the market. But tell us a little bit more about that piece of it.
Yeah, so starting off with how barrel costing works, there are different pricing structures for, say, your Appalachian woods and your Ozark woods. So regionally it will change, but for the most part, it's relatively consistent across the varying forest markets. However, it's mostly based on the barrel being primarily the white oak, all based on whatever your market white oak price is. From that point on, everybody has their overhead and similar associated costs. So
Yeah.
And how long they're air dried has a big piece too, right? Like I hear that some people like they rave that, oh, ours has been air dried for 18 months, ours has been 36 months. I've heard all kinds of different things like that. How does that play into that?
Yeah, so that definitely has a pretty sizable effect on both the cost and the quality. So for us, we're air seasoning for approximately 6 months for our standard barrels.
Yeah.
However, we do several. We'll do experiments with people. We've got 12-month air season. We've got 18-month, 48-month. You know, we have quite a
That
range.
48 month is tasty.
48 months.
Yes.
So what's the longest you've done or heard of from anybody?
The longest that we've ever tried was 8 years.
Oh God.
And
It was so good.
yeah, it was a very unique.
That's what, 96 months or something?
It was a long time, but we had
Sounds tasty.
Yeah.
We
had
tried
some.
some. Where were we at?
we had some over at Neely's, I believe.
No, we were in
Oh, that was at Stumpy's.
Stumpy's.
Yeah,
Stumpies.
yeah.
Yeah.
What
That's
did
a
they
great
What did they
name.
put in it? Can you say what they put in it, or
As far as like what kind of
like
what kind of
whiskey
juice went in
into
it, yeah.
it was just whatever they were running for their standard juice, and yeah, it was
great.
pretty. I liked it a lot actually.
But you don't make money when staves are sitting out there all
Well, yeah.
those years.
No, I get it.
Get
I mean,
that.
fair,
I just,
yeah.
Because
I'm just
that's
curious.
8 years
right?
until you have to recoup all those costs.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
and
get
You
that.
can't. Yeah, you really can't make it.
That's a $3,000 barrel.
Yeah,
No,
you're
no,
not
I
lying.
know.
I will say, as far as barrel pricing, which you've told me a lot before, is the price. You know, the price of barrels is going up, but a lot of that has to do with like the interest rates and the housing market.
Oh,
So
100%.
Zach was like, you know, people aren't laying hardwood floors, they're not renovating their houses, so landowners who have this wood are not putting their wood up for sale because they're not getting money for any of the wood. They're only the only wood that's bringing money right now is American oak, and you can't just go and cut American oak down. You have to cut the whole tract of wood. So they're like, well, we're not going to sell it. So the logs themselves are way more expensive than they used to be. So when you're having to buy logs all the time, like the price of barrels are going up.
Yeah, so
The economy.
yeah, lots of different factors there, and one of the overarching themes that we've seen over probably the past decade, even, it's not a very attractive job right now or over the past 10 years to get into logging.
Right.
It takes a lot of money. It's very labor intensive, and you have big droughts where there's just no money in some of those species. So it makes it pretty tough when only a few different species are really bringing in enough money to, keep your logging crew together. So
That's super interesting. I mean, there's so much that goes into it that none of us realize.
Yeah. So does the char level affect? Like, do you charge more for a char 1 or a 4 or in what 5 is the max, right? Alligator char or something of that nature? Okay.
Yeah. So there's no difference in
It's all pretty the
pricing.
same. Gotcha.
Yeah. We work with all of our customers to get whatever their specified char levels, toast levels. And for us, it's just a matter of setting the dials on all of our charring. Toasting is done all on timer. So for us, it doesn't make a difference. We're just trying to make whatever our distiller, whatever profile they're trying to achieve, we'll achieve it.
Which I think is really great because now, I mean, right, with the vast expansion of the bourbon market, I mean, people want to have the ability to customize every single part of everything that they make. And so if they can say, I remember there were some guys who were like, I want a level 3.5 char barrel with toasted heads and split staves and all this stuff. And people can do it nowadays because, like you said, all it is adjusting a couple different settings. And I think it's great because now you have expanded all these flavor profiles and palettes out there to have more drinkers come and try your product. So I think it's really great that people can do that.
Yeah, and everybody wants to have something that makes them unique. So it's a great way to differentiate yourself from whatever bottle is next to it on the shelf.
Right. So some of the new hot things I see are like I've seen. I don't remember where I was at, but I saw where the staves had like little gashes cut in them. Like,
Little grooves.
little grooves and stuff like that.
We tried those at Stumpy's too.
Yeah.
Where
Sounds like we need to go to Stumpy's.
Yeah, we did
Oh my gosh,
stuff
it was great. So he had 2 barrels in the rick house side by side, filled the same day, the same distillate. And Zach had given him like a regular barrel and then like one of the wavy staves or groove staves. Yeah, the groove
Which one was
staves.
better?
Oh my God, the groove stave.
It was a pretty
Phenomenal.
awesome side-by-side analysis. Like being able to compare the two right there in the rick house, it was like, wow, there's such a distinct difference here. It's
Really?
Like, yeah, I
It was
was
crazy. It
That's
was crazy.
awesome.
But Zach said he was like really trying like hard a couple years ago to like sell any barrels. Like, hey, try this, and people were not interested. So maybe there'll be a resurgence.
So with the groove stave, so did you find that the color was massively different? Because obviously there's more char that goes into that barrel because of the grooves.
So there was a little bit of difference, not only in the color, but so you get about a 15% increase in surface area exposure when you have the grooving process done.
Okay.
Additionally, you have a gradient that's created from like that heavier char on the peak, then the softer toastier exposure in the valleys. So it kind of creates this, unique profile structure all on its own.
Huh, yeah. So you get kind of those sweeter notes from like that toasting piece, and then you get some of that. That sounds so crazy.
Yeah.
So,
It was very flavorful.
Never even thought
I
about
was
that.
very impressed with it.
Now it's time to go to Stumpy's.
Oh my gosh, it was a fun day.
Yeah.
so my wife would kill me if I didn't ask you this question, because this is the one thing that she hates about bourbon, and she always gives me shit about it.
The
and things
one
like that.
thing that
it
she
really
hates?
is. It really is. It's the one thing. She talks about the sustainability of bourbon and
Yeah.
trees and the growth and things
Abso-freaking-lutely.
to that. She's like, why haven't they done this? Why? I'm like, because that's not the American way. Like bourbon is literally a law now, right? So what's your opinion on how sustainability works, right? Like as
Sure.
many barrels and stuff that we're making at this point. I mean, you're seeing thousands and thousands and thousands of juice getting laid down every single day. Are we planting enough trees? What are we doing? What's going on that market side?
No, that's a great question. It's a very important question too. So right now with all the expansion of everybody, it seems like everybody's, doubling their capacity for distillation, and it's all got to go into a barrel at the end of the day. So right now what we're kind of seeing is there's not necessarily a shortage of actual white oak out there. It is being able to access it, and right now there's not a lot of, outside of going to private landowners that own hundreds or thousands of acres, it's up to that individual landowner to be convinced, hey, it's time for me to put up my white oak for sale. And so that limits a lot of the supply creating these, shortages and whether you're running out.
But as a cooperage, do you plant trees also, or
No.
or is that something? Because I know, like, I've heard that some distilleries actually plant trees. Like
It's
they're like,
not the most helpful.
Yeah. So the problem, it's
I
a
mean it.
great, in theory, it's a, sounds great, but white oak is a very hardy hardwood,
Right.
and it regenerates on its own. So typically tracts of timber that get, that are exposed to wildfires, the first thing to regrow there is white oak. It doesn't even have to be naturally planted. It plants
just
itself.
natural, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so it's got that hard acorn shell, and it's able to withstand a lot of, whatever the elements throw at it. So it's typically the first thing to regrow, and it's very easy as long as forests are properly maintained over time and responsibly managed, the white oak can regenerate itself. It's all about if you can harvest the most mature white oak trees out of your maturing forests and allow the saplings underneath to come up underneath it and replace it. That's how generally responsible forest management works.
So how old is a typical harvested tree for barrel use?
Typically, it could be somewhere in between 60, 80 years old.
Okay,
Oh,
so they're
wow.
not cutting anything down that's 18 or 20 years old. Most
absolutely
likely.
not.
Okay,
No, it wouldn't be large enough to even harvest.
gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
There is a barrel cooperage convention every year, and the White Oak Initiative is really big on like forest management and responsibly harvesting. And it's, all the cooperages get together and the suppliers, and they talk about these issues. And so they were there presenting a couple months ago about this, and they were like, we need to harvest, like you need to have landowners know they need to harvest the big trees, the ones that are fully mature, because the canopy is so big.
Right.
The way the other trees can come up, there are enough trees, they just aren't being like harvested as they should.
That makes perfectly good sense.
And they're like looking at like, it's like, we don't change anything, like we're not going to have the trees at the rate that we're going, but it's not because they're not growing, it's because you have to cut them down so sunlight and resources can get to the other trees and grow. So I am also with your wife. I love like trees and the White Oak Initiative and all the Pocahontas thing.
Yeah, my wife is such a hippie in some capacity,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
I love that about her. But
The
it's
tree's
just one
going
of
to
those,
die if you don't use it.
right? Yeah,
It will die. It will fall over and die.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, quick other point is that, for example, like your Hoosier National Forest or Daniel Boone National Forest, these federally owned forests that there's no, like, for example, in France, you can, there's X amount of trees that can be harvested every year, and they take the most mature and they manage those federally owned forests, whereas in America, you're not able to do that. Those trees and forests just keep
growing,
on
yeah.
on aging, and they will eventually just die of old age. So it would be nice to be able to have access to forests like that, so there could be a proper management.
Right. So in that situation, though, and once again, I'm ignorant to this, right? Like, how do you go in? I mean, like you said, you basically have to cut a track, right? Like, you'd have to cut 6, 8, 10 acres at a time, So you're going to lose maple trees and all the other stuff that's in that area as well, right?
Yeah, for the most part, that's pretty common.
Right. Okay.
Do they resell? I mean, they sell those.
Well, they sell that for other things, right?
yeah.
I
It
mean,
could go
paper
to-
or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could go to mixed hardwood
Yeah.
market and get individually sorted out from there.
It's so you just don't think about that most of the time.
There-
You don't understand
No.
it from a holistic.
But you do have to think about it from a sustainability issue,
You
right?
do,
Like,
but people just don't.
They
But
don't.
with the bourbon boom, there's a lot more to think about than just like I love barrels and I like love working in used barrels because you can extend the life of a barrel. Like when that tree gets cut down, that barrel can live for another 80 years. It can
Right.
go to bourbon, it can go to Scotch, it can go here, it can go there. Like you can recycle it and then make it into a pretty planter. And then once that planter falls apart, it goes back to the earth. But with like the bourbon boom and the amount of like grain and like like not chemicals, like what am I like?
But
Byproducts of
Right.
making this and like
Sure.
the resources that we're using all in the same area. The water, like Bardstown doesn't have enough like water for any more distilleries to come. Like, well, we can't provide a distillery with that much water, so like we're capped out at distilleries here. Like
And we love Kentucky bourbon. We have plenty of water in Indiana.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my
That's why they're
gosh.
like,
Go over there and stay.
no, absolutely. That's why some of these like rural areas, like, Elizabethtown is starting to be developed. You have the Whiskey House over there. Like, hopefully, like all these towns will get more distilleries. So there's a lot more like going on as far as like thinking about sustainability too.
That's crazy.
Absolutely. So what's the favorite part of your job?
Zach loves his job.
I do.
He loves barrels more than anybody that I've ever met.
For me, my passion is mostly on the stave milling side. I think, being able to really take that white oak log, get the most yield out of it as possible, figure out how to mill it as efficiently as possible, I think is really important, to the sustainability standpoint. There's a lot of stave mills and cooperages that allow a lot of waste, and if you can get the most out of your white oak tree, it goes the furthest for you over in the cooperage. So that's where it all starts. And if you don't have control over the very beginning stages of how that barrel becomes a barrel, there's a lot that you lose out on.
Right.
Is a lot of that manually done still?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's unfortunately we're not at the point where you can like just take a log and it spits out a barrel at the end. I wish.
Push a button.
Well,
Yeah.
Okay. So let me I guess rephrase it. So like how much like hands-on, like I'm assuming like, and I've seen videos and I have no idea if it's a cooperage that they're doing this, like, but they literally drop a log onto a thing. They kind of peel the bark off and get it to where it's somewhat a certain space. And then it gets shoved down to the line, right? And then somebody else pushes it to this and they do that. So is there that many hands touching it in that situation? Or do you guys have a system like that? And then basically it goes to a place where they cut them in like long giant sheets or whatever. So
for us, we are still relatively, we do have a good solid crew of people that are working. So we don't have the level of automation of, say, a Brown Forman or one of Sazerac's sawmills. But you can still achieve a lot of the same efficiencies. And I think by having a little bit more human interaction with the log and the individual cut up parts, that you can make some decisions to really maximize your yield in certain situations. So yeah, we're doing the same thing. You have to cut the log into quarters and cut it down to proper thickness, remove any of the defects.
Yeah.
And he goes, like, they have their own stave mill, but he goes every week on the outside and like buys staves, and has been training for several years with someone to do that, to like look at the staves that have already been cut and like find the defects and like know what percentage that he can use, and then like buy those staves based on that percentage.
That's interesting.
So like looking at the wood and being like, how much can I get out of this and how much is it worth?
right.
So I did hear that in a foreign country, not here, they have a fully automated cooperage that's obviously closed off to the public. It's experimental right now, but it's fully automated. There's one person that runs it.
Does it work? Brown Forman tried to do that one time. Remember? I don't know. I remember like that was a rumor a long time ago.
I don't think it's Brown
No, I
Forman.
know, not here. You said.
What do you think about that? Because I think it's really weird, because it's such a hands-on industry and it's such a hands-on specific product that this one cooperage, and I don't know any products that come out of it, but I just know that there is a fully automated system that does it from start to finish, builds a barrel.
So before Zach answers, how's that even possible? Because like I've seen when the videos of people making barrels, like they're literally throwing staves into those rings to get it to where. Like,
I don't know. I haven't seen it.
But go ahead, man.
An AI cooperage?
No, that's basically what it was described to me as. Is there's just one person, one or two people that like make sure that it doesn't blow up, and from start to finish, it's fully automated.
I think it'd be an awesome concept, and maybe eventually we can get to that point. But I think there's a lot that goes into it along each individual step that I don't think you can necessarily fully automate out. But
like, can a computer catch like?
That's what I mean.
Like
I don't
holes or like green.
Oh yeah,
they're
doing that already. Yeah.
Okay.
But I wonder, like, the quality of it that comes out of it, if it would be close to being the same. I don't even know.
I'd like to know. That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, eventually that's probably the
Road trip.
direction.
let's go. That's the goal.
We're gonna take an airplane.
Yeah,
Just be you running the Cooperage by yourself.
I mean, it's very difficult to get labor. It's not easy work. It's a lot of very hard manual labor that goes into most cooperages. So the more automation that there is that becomes available, I think is absolutely a benefit in order to reach everybody's goals.
For sure.
But yeah, I think it's a novel idea. Probably still.
It's only $1 billion cooperage, right? Who cares?
So
Can't imagine.
Do you cooper anything other than oak?
We do different types of white oak, but all of it is white oak.
Gotcha.
We'll experiment around with. So we've got a, your standard Quercus alba is what all of our standard barrels are, and then we also have a chinkapin program, which is a specific subspecies of white oak, and that kind of has some more different taste profiles, and we work with a handful of distillers that are really trying to create something unique, and they'll use that.
I tried a chinkapin barrel one time.
That is just such a funny name.
And I'm really glad that I didn't butcher it while I said that.
Yeah.
Chinkapin oak.
So
There's a lot of
I've only
chinkapin.
tried it. I've only knowingly tried
Oh,
it
yeah,
one
same.
time, I guess.
Yeah.
So how many different white oak varieties are there in the United States?
Oh, there's a handful of different subspecies. Honestly, I couldn't tell you an exact number, but there's
Well, it's a good Jeopardy
I mean,
question.
10 more?
probably, there could be 10 or so, but like
Let me Google it.
pin oak or there's chestnut oak, but there's also different types of oaks that are not capable of holding and being watertight. So
Oh, okay.
yeah,
So I would have never thought about that.
Yeah, so like red oak is different from the white oak species, but
Right.
red oak, it actually
Too porous, yeah.
it's too porous, so it doesn't have the tyloses.
Yeah.
Those are the individual
Strands, yeah.
cell
Yeah.
barriers that don't allow.
That is super interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons why white oak was so prevalently used and they didn't use a whole lot of other wood was because of that. Like they just kind of realized that it wasn't as porous as the other woods, and that's how it kind of became the thing that it is today. So what's your opinion on French oak versus American and Hungarian and all those type of things? I don't know if you've worked with all of them or not, but like, do you have an opinion on what's your favorite, or what do you think, or outside of American oak, obviously?
Sure. We've been in the process of trying to experiment around with some of it. Personally, I haven't worked with French oak or Hungarian oak at this point, but that's definitely some future projects that will be upcoming. But I think there's a lot that could be offered. I think you can get a lot of really unique flavors. There's really good access to white oak that's all across the world. I mean, we were just talking about that there was somebody that was using Colombian oak, and
Yeah, I had to write Canton and be like, did you ever make, because a lot of, like when the last barrel shortage happened 8 years ago or so, they were just using whatever they could use, like let's just keep using. And there was a Colombian oak that came from an MGP barrel.
Yeah.
And I wrote Canton. I'm like, did you have a Colombian oak? And they're like, we did use that. I'm like, are you still using it? Is it for sale? They're like, no, we don't still use it. We can ask. And I'm like, that's okay. But it was just super interesting.
Well, yeah, there's white oak varieties all over the world, right? So, but I mean, it's just weird that when you start seeing those things, like I said, the Hungarian, the French,
yeah, there's Mongolian oak.
Yeah.
But that's what's really interesting, and kind of going back to our initial conversation. Each region, you get all the minerals, and you really get to extract different profiles from each of those different regions. So there's different minerals in different soils. Here in Kentucky, we're sitting on a lot of limestone. So limestone's one of those primary minerals that the white oak's able to absorb out of the soil. Yeah, it makes for really unique profiles. I think it's something that you'll continue to see cooperages and distillers experiment with and try to get whatever unique profiles there are out there in the world.
Gotcha. what am I missing? Is there something else that like people need to know about barrels or how they're made, or the process that you think that is unique that maybe they don't understand and what goes into making that?
Yeah, I mean, one aspect of making a barrel that probably isn't well known about to the general public. Air seasoning is really, really important. From a biology standpoint, you're getting a lot of breakdown of your tannins and acids in the white oak. So when you cut a stave that's fresh from the stave mill, right after you cut up the log, there's so much moisture and tannins and acids built up in that. It's so necessary to set it outside and be able to leach out all those, astringent flavors out. And you get the elements working in your favor, the sunlight, microbes on the exterior, breaking down different chemicals.
So much.
Yeah, it's a big chemical reaction, really.
So wait a minute,
That's the air season.
I just
Yeah,
thought,
exactly.
I just thought of something. So are there distilleries using kiln drying?
Yeah. So most people are doing a air season for however many months for a standard barrel. Generally, you see it between 3 to 9 months. And
because right now you really can't do it a whole lot longer with the demand of barrels.
Gotcha. Okay. That's
There's
why I
like
thought it was
so-
a good question.
so
and it'll
much of a
vary
demand.
from
Yeah.
it varies from cooperage to cooperage.
Yeah.
Because I'm starting to see a lot more kiln dry stuff just in general. Like
Oh, yeah.
we were doing some remodeling at our house, and like outside, like we were ordering cedar, but it had to be kiln dry in order for it to
It all
have
has
a certain
to be kiln dry
So
after they bring
Gotcha.
it in. I can
Okay.
tell the days that Zach is in the kiln because he'll come home and he's like black, like he's got black soot all over him. I'm like, were you in the kiln today?
you smell all kilny and charry.
Yeah, well, every day he comes home, he smells like American oak.
I mean, yeah.
well, okay,
Jack just oozes wood.
Well, no, when we first started dating, he was like, like the smell of American oak, and I'm like, nope, hun, no, don't know what American oak fresh smells like.
I have that clone.
He's like,
on
just
American
wait.
Oak.
But,
It's
but
made by
now I
Bath and
do.
Body Works,
Now
right?
I'm like, oh, he smells like American oak.
just wait.
Yeah, now I know. I'm like, that's American oak. But the days you're in the kiln, you're like dirty.
Yeah, and the kiln drying process. So that's what brings everything down to a neutral or all level moisture content level, so you can process it, work it, mill it down.
So you don't
into
break
cooperage.
it, so it's not green.
Well, that's the thing.
Yeah.
I just assumed they would all have to be, but then again, we always heard air dry, so I'm like, well, maybe they don't kiln it at all, because I just thought because of the fact that there's a possibility of wood-borne creatures or things like that. Like I was like, wouldn't you have to kiln it to make sure that you don't get that kind of stuff into the whiskey or into the barrel?
You have to kiln it, right?
Um,
Do some people not?
It depends on how long it's been air season. I mean,
Right.
It'll get dry enough depending on the climate outside, time of year. I mean, if you have something sitting outside for 2 years, it's plenty dry. It can, as long as it's not surface moisture wet from rain recently, it's ready to go. You can just
Gotcha.
take
Okay.
that straight to the cooperage.
Interesting.
So, like I said, I just made an assumption. Like I was like, well, I don't know. I've never been to a cooperage. Only cooperage I've ever been into is when you go to the distilleries and they're like, oh, look at this. This is our little makeshift cooperage
Oh,
here.
like
so
Old
yeah, like Old
Forester?
Forester,
Old
right?
Forester's
Only
like-
like Old Forest.
It's
Yeah.
like Bob the Builder. They're like,
Yeah.
look at this orange, beautiful equipment that's never, ever
Now
been
push the
used.
button.
Push
the
the
flame comes up.
Yeah.
And you go to like a real cooperage and it's like, I can't breathe. There's sawdust
Yeah.
every freaking where. It's like,
Yeah.
How'd that guy start that fire? Did he fart on it? What?
So they show the toasting, and then they show this, and then they
I love that though. I think Old Forester is the one place downtown that you can go and see the whole process from
No,
start to finish. They
100%.
have the bottling.
It's
they
a
have
very
It is. No one.
abridged version of it, which is
Well,
nice.
exactly, because if you are downtown and you want to go to a distillery and you're not trying to travel everywhere, like you can see everything from start to bottling.
It is nice.
It is nice. It's a little like
Yeah, it's a
I
nice
concur.
offering.
wiki.
it
Click, click,
probably
click,
it
Wiki,
probably is
wiki.
it probably is
Fast.
it probably is my favorite tour for that reason.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I agree.
absolutely.
And people always say, "Well, you're just saying that because you're just a big old fan."
I'm a big
You
old
are
fan.
I'm like,
big
well, I'm a
old
big
folk
old folk
fan.
fan, but
I'm
I'm
a
not
huge Old
yeah.
Forester fan.
But I mean, there's something about like being, like you said, being able to see it from start to finish. Whereas if you go to Buffalo Trace, it's just a different experience, right? The history and the heritage you feel like is there.
Oh, I love every
and
distillery
it's a little
for a different
dirty. Yeah,
reason.
exactly.
Yeah.
Equal opportunity
Where's the one that's real
distillery,
clinical? Is it Heaven Hill? The new experience out of Heaven Hill is like just feels a little more clinical than it used to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh. I don't know.
I mean, it's like you have to think with the mass amounts of people. Like I used to love Heaven Hill because it was just like country people being like, well, let's do this, let's do that.
Right.
But it has to be like to accommodate everyone. It has to be like kind of clinical.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, good deal. So, Zach, we greatly appreciate the time we got to spend with you. If people want to, ask you a question, or are they allowed to ask you a question? You want to give them an
Jessica.
email?
Ask me. I was going to say, you can ask me.
Like if people want to contact you or ask additional information, do you want them to send it through me, or do you have an email or something that you want people to ask questions on, or things like that? Because I'm sure we missed something. I mean, like it's just such an
I don't know. We
an
covered
awesome
a lot.
institution. So
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, of course, they can always go straight through you. They're always welcome to visit our website. I've got a contact page that has my email, office phone number, and a contact submission form.
what's the email? I mean, what's the website address?
ZAK Cooperage.com.
Okay.
www.
Yeah.
www.
ZAKCooperage.com.
Yep.
ZAK.
We're on the World Wide Web.
Zach does have an Instagram.
Yeah, that you manage.
I do not manage
Them-
his
No.
Instagram. He no.
There are no posts on there.
You're on them interwebs, buddy.
He would respond.
You would respond.
But I will say he's very, very, very busy. And so if somebody's like, I want to do a tour, like probably not going to get back to you. And not because he doesn't want to, but he's
I will
doing
say,
the thing.
I about 4 years ago when we started this, Alan Bishop said you need to go out to ZAK Cooperage and you need to talk to those dudes to find out about barrels. And I did send a message like 3 different times. Like,
I mean,
and
Zach
it might
is
have
like,
been through Facebook. I don't
He's, like,
remember
working
how I
on
sent the
equipment,
message, but
like-
I remember sending a message. I want to come out and I would just want to interview to talk about barrels, and like crickets.
Sorry, buddy.
I do apologize for that.
I just figured you were just too busy.
You've
like,
made up
He is
for it.
and
busy.
that's the thing with anything like this, and that it's the good thing that I've been in the industry long enough that you start meeting great people, and you meet people like Jess, and they know you, and
Yeah.
it becomes like a big happy family is
Yeah.
what I tell people, and that's been the good thing about the podcast just in general is that everybody knows everybody at some
I'm very
point.
good at filtering out messages. So if you want to write me on Bourbon Insider, I will get a message to Zach if it.
Bourbon Insider, and that's your Instagram.
That's my
right?
socials
Your
everywhere.
social, okay.
Bourbon Insider. I will.
She
get
does
the-
a fantastic job describing barrels and all kinds of stuff on
Well,
there.
I
so
just mean
she's-
like I can get to the man here.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, but I
We
feel
live
like
in the same
you give
house.
good content just in general as
Yeah.
far as like just you talk about barrels, you
Right.
talk about whiskey, you talk about this, you talk about the tourism piece. Like I've seen you just talk about different things, so it is
Yeah.
definitely a good one. So we appreciate that. So
We have seen you talk about many things. That is
I will
correct.
talk. I said, like don't always do it because I'm like don't know what people. I'm all over the place. I'm like, do we want to talk about barrels, tourism? But the bourbon industry is my life, and that's really all I know. So
fair
That's
enough.
fair.
Well, Zach, thanks so much for coming on the show. If you want to
Appreciate
find
it.
Bourbon Barrel Talk, you can find us on Instagram, the Facebook, or the Twitter /X, whatever they
X.
want to call it these days. If you want to get our episodes, make sure you go to wherever your favorite medium is, whether it's iHeartRadio, Google Podcast, iTunes, whatever. Make sure you hit the subscribe button, and you can find us there. If you want to send us that question, instead of bothering Zach, you can call us first or email us first at bourbonbarreltalk@gmail.com. This is Scott, Zach, Jess, and Matt signing off. Peace.
cheers.